we are going to be telling you about some things we've seen down in the evaluation trenches. But very quickly, who's METR? We're a research nonprofit. I started METR in 2022 after leaving OpenAI, feeling like, whoa, there needs to be some more like independent expert perspectives on some of the big questions about AI and risk. So I think it seems a little bit concerning that there is no consensus on, just little tiny trivial questions like, should we be worried about AI killing everyone? So I want to do a quick hand poll here. How many people think this is like basically nonsense or silly?
Huh.
That is surprising. Okay. Maybe we already scared all the skeptics off. Whoops. Okay, how many people would describe themselves as like very concerned?
Wow.
And then like unsure or confused? Cool. Yeah, we wanted the dramatic disagreements. Anyway, yes, even if we're not, actively, there aren't fights breaking out, there's still, it's not like we have a solid answer here. But I think this is just a very difficult question to answer about future technologies. And I don't think we're, ideally we'd like think about this very hard and then just kind of like figure it out and decide what we're doing with AI based on like knowing exactly what's going to happen and what to worry about. That seems too hard. But what we can do and what we're trying to do at METR is keep an eye on this, keep checking carefully. We're like, well, we don't think systems right now are dangerous. Can we like roll that forward a bit? How far ahead can we see? And can we agree what we should do based on the evidence we see? So, the kind of hope that we'll keep looking at stuff, and if we see evidence of risk, we can take a bunch of actions. And if it turns out it was actually fine all along, hopefully we can just like keep going without too much issue. But the key thing is here, do you detect it in time? So we want to be able to see far enough ahead that we have time to respond before the bad things happen. So, what bad things may have been thinking about? Things that AI systems may be capable of in the future include, the cyber threats, bioweapons. One of the things we particularly think about at METR are so accelerating AI R&D such that the pace of progress might get very fast, and it's very hard for us to do this, like checking where the danger levels are and reacting appropriately. Or these kind of alignment loss of control scenarios where it's not just a kind of threat actor using AI as a tool to do a worse version of what they were doing anyway, but it's actually the agents doing stuff that nobody wanted them to do and sort of grabbing power or messing with our ability to train new systems or that kind of thing. So in slightly more detail, like the kind of loss of control or rogue replication story in particular is you end up with some model weights on the internet, either because someone open sourced them, someone stole them from a lab that wasn't trying to open source them, or maybe the agent exfiltrated itself. These agents set themselves up running on a bunch of different servers, set up various protections to make it hard to shut down. They've got lots of different copies saved everywhere and things like this. And then, if we've got these agents with these cyber or bio or other dangerous capabilities, and they're like all around on the internet and they're hard to shut down, that seems like a kind of concerning scenario, at least. And yeah, it's like, seems pretty implausible that current agents could manage to do this, but we want to keep checking and confirming that is still the case. So today we are, here's kind of three questions. One is, what is the real world impact of systems currently? The second is, when should we expect to see very capable systems, or should we not? And how easy will it be to make sure these systems do what we want them to do? So more quick polls. So for real world impact, who's in the boat of, basically it seems like current models can already do a bunch of software engineering and like should be able to automate a substantial fraction of software engineering. Cool. Who's in the boat of, it kind of seems like current models can't really do anything significantly economically useful.
Aside from coding or including?
Including coding. Who's unsure or confused. Yep. Okay. Next question. When are we seeing very capable systems where, I'm wanting to define very capable systems as something like, if you have on one side of a conflict, you have a bunch of these AI systems and a small number of humans, and on the other side, you have like most of the rest of humanity and like, weaker AI systems, like the hostile systems have a good chance of winning. Whatever conflict, like yes, basically, or like that is in scope. So who thinks this is like plausible within 3 years?
Plausible is what percentage?
At least 30%.
Oh.
Oh, really? Okay, I was gonna say like
Okay, sorry.
I was gonna say like whole number percent or a few
More
percent
than
or something.
1%? Oh,
Yeah.
okay, cool.
I don't know.
Well, that makes a difference for one person.
Yeah.
It's plausible by
So
28.
plausible by 2028. So what is 1%?
Yeah.
1%? It means
Plausible by 2040. Basically not plausible or would be a lot later than 2040.
We get the skeptic.
Unsure or confused?
Sorry, a clarifying question. This assumes that the AI has an agency or will of its own, not that it's acting on behalf of humans.
It could be acting on behalf of like hostile humans.
Yeah, this is just a question about capabilities. Cool. Okay, next one. How hard will it be to make sure that these AI systems are not kind of trying or not succeeding in undermining our controls or like, trying to grab power for themselves? Who's in the camp of like, I don't see why we need to worry about that. That seems silly.
I would just clarify there's sort of two things conflated here. One is about the motivations of the system, and the other is about alignability. So, there are scenarios where the system doesn't have any intrinsic motivation to do anything bad, but we just don't really know how to make systems do what we want, and they get set off in some tangent, and that's dangerous. You're kind of putting those two together here.
Yeah, I was trying to be slightly more specific, like models actively undermining, not just that like we can't get them to do useful stuff, but the like actively trying to seize control question. So yeah, who's in the don't need to worry about that camp? Okay, we really scared away all the skeptics. Who's in like this seems like it ought to be achievable, although it might be hard work.
To control them or that it would happen?
To control them. Okay. Anyone like this seems extremely hard? Maybe impossible?
Well, if it sure is 100%, then yes.
Yeah, okay. Unsure or confused, what is even this question? Okay, I'm surprised not more people being like, I don't like your definition, but yeah. Anyway, sorry, we're just trying to get people thinking, get a rough idea of where we're at currently. Anyway, most of in this talk, we will comprehensively answer these questions and leave you with perfectly satisfactory answers and no remaining uncertainty. And handing over to Lawrence. No.
Great.
No, so obviously we don't have definitive answers, but we're just going to kind of try and tell you about things that we've seen that seem relevant to these questions and kind of what we think that means. And yes, Lawrence will now do most of the talking.
Cool. Thank you. Microphone working? Yeah. Cool. Thanks. Right. So the first question we talked about, where we did a hand poll on, is what's the real world impact of current AI systems? How close are they to doing like economically relevant work like software engineering and so forth? So, on one hand, if you go on Twitter or if you just like talk to people in the industry, they have many examples of like really fast adoption of AI systems, coding assistants in particular. And oftentimes there are claims that, a 2-digit percentage of the code at these companies are being written like entirely through AI. On the other hand, when you actually when many economists study this issue, at best they find mixed results, but in practice, a lot of times they don't find like these huge, massive results that people are claiming. We're not economists, so unfortunately, we don't have. I don't feel like I'm qualified to like do more economics here, but we can like do some other studies, and that's what we're going to talk about. So one approach is, we have these anecdotes. We could definitely try to do a systematic survey of other people and go like, of the lab employees, how many of them actually believe that this is what's going on? How much do they feel like they're being sped up? And number two is we can try to measure, how AI affects particular hard performance metrics like time it took to complete a task or, like quality of task as assessed by a third party and so forth. So this is probably many people in the audience have heard a bit about this, but we ran an uplift RCT. That is, basically what we did is we gathered a large number or a decent number of, very highly skilled developers who contributed to top open source repositories. This is like sort of their day job or like basically their day job. And we had them work on issues that they were originally going to work on. But sometimes they were allowed to use AI and sometimes they were not allowed to use AI. And what we did is then, now that we have all these issues, we can try to calculate the time change that's attributable to these use of AI. So how much like AI speeds them up in particular. We can also try to label the recordings and figure out like what are the subcomponents, like what are people spending time on. And we can finally do a comparison, right? Like we can definitely go like how on or off are people's estimates of what's going on. We can definitely collect expert forecasts. We've also done exit surveys. Right. So long story short, if you like ask people, if you actually try to do a sort of this is not like that systematic, but it does feature a lot of people. You see that people expect massive speed ups from like people using AI versus not using AI. In fact, like, if you ask economic expert forecasts, they give something like it'll take 40% less time to complete these tasks if they do use AI. If you ask ML experts, they also say a similar number, maybe a little bit lower, 35, 38%. You ask the developers, they're like, our issues are hard, so it's only minus 20%. And notably, what's really interesting is that after the fact, after they used the AI, their minds didn't really change. They're like, well, the AI was slightly less useful than expected, but it's still like, 18% speed up or something. And it turns out that in this case, the AI slowed them down by a lot. Right. So like what is going on here, right? Like you have these really skilled people who are doing things that they do during the day job, and then they like you have them, do a thing with AI without a thing with AI, and they go like, yeah, the AI, it was so much, sped me up so much. And you look at how long it took them, and it took them 20% longer. Like, what's going on here? So there's a lot of conclusions you can draw from this study. One important one is that vibes can be really off, right? Like people can think that they're getting sped up, but if you don't actually track it, who knows? I do want to caveat a bunch of things, as Joel would probably want me to. Some takeaways we don't actually believe. We don't believe that this study shows that there's like no use cases where AI speeds people up. In fact, we believe that there are many use cases where AI is indeed helpful for things. We just think that it's not true in this particular cohort that we studied. Also, we're not making a claim about the future, right? This is saying in early 2025, when we take the best models we had at the time, here's what we see, here's what's going on. And even we're not even making a strong claim that, actual developers inside the labs are being slowed down by the AIs because, again, these are open source developers working outside the labs using like publicly available or commercially available tooling. That being said, I think we still have takeaways. Right, and the important one, as I emphasized before, as is very obvious from this figure, vibes don't have to match reality. It's often the case that people just can't self-assess what's going on. AI slows down experienced programmers in like pretty realistic tasks on like mature code bases. And more speculatively, when people say there's going to be massive acceleration of research or like software development due to AI, it probably won't happen because again, like the software is very much top heavy and driven by like sort of the most productive engineers. And also this is more for us and less for you, but we were running the survey of AI by lab employees. And after we saw this result, we stopped the survey. Why did we stop the survey? I mean, there's finite resources. We did a, so the audience member asked, why did we stop the survey, right? Well, our answer is something like we have finite resources. We did a small, like kind of not super systematic study already in the course of our original work. And then the question was like, should we invest like, a few more full-time people to doing this? And the answer was no, we're just going to go with the preliminary stuff. Okay, and so this naturally leads into current work. Joel is the person who has a lot of opinions about this, so maybe you should, if you're interested in learning about what we're currently doing, you should talk to Joel up here. But we are interested. One important caveat, right, is that early 2025 models are 9 months old, and by like machine learning standards, that's an eon ago, apparently. So we got to run some new studies. We're going to run studies with less experienced developers, which again was an important caveat to our results. We're going to run studies where, developers work with AIs over time to see if there's major learning effects, or if it's just like, if it's just like the developers not knowing what to do or what's going on there. Also, a few weeks ago, we ran a man versus machine hackathon where people were not allowed to use AI for the hackathon. And the results will be published. I've been told it's inauspicious to give dates, so I'm not going to give a date.
I'm curious more about like what's like within this and how you kind of came to these conclusions. Like, were there some people that got better? Was actually people's estimate of their improvement correlated at least with their improvement, or maybe it was like anti-correlated? Like, are there like delusional people? Were there like some people that were actually using the tools really well, and did you kind of talk to them and figure out what they were doing?
Yeah, great question. I think on the developer level, we're quite underpowered or don't have enough data to really say sensible things. That there is a negative correlation between the degree to which we think people were sped up and their forecasts of how much they were sped up.
That's incredible.
Their forecasts of how much they were sped up are sort of very highly positively correlated with their estimates after the study. The optimists beforehand and the optimists
Right.
afterwards. Yeah, I'm not sure how much I'm not sure how much stock I'd place in any of this.
Sure.
All right. Again, we have a Q&A at the end. I'm happy to answer more questions. No, it's totally fine. I think clarifying questions are really good. I feel like the staff would want me to say this. I'm going to blame them. Yeah, sorry. All right. Question number 2. When will we see very capable AIs, if at all, in the near future? Right. So people have very wildly different intuitions, including many people who are currently in the audience. Maybe we don't have Dario in the audience, but we do have many people with similar beliefs. They claim things like, oh yeah, by mid-2026, not only will we be able to have companies that are run like 95% by AIs, we're going to have them be worth billions of dollars. And on the other hand, we have people, some of whom are in the audience, who are pointing out, there are a lot of limitations. I don't believe that LLMs will actually get to superintelligence like they're going to. As he said, Gary Marcus does not believe that we're going to imminently get superintelligence. If you take a look at his timelines and you go back to 2015 and you talk to people, they're going to say, oh my God, this guy's crazy. Why is it so fast? Because people back then were like, oh, 2100, that's when we're going to get AI, or 2200. People are crazy. All right. So sort of what's interesting is that we have lots of benchmarks. People have been trying to measure the capabilities of AIs across many scales for many things. And generally, these benchmarks go up. The problem that we have a lot of the benchmarks is basically they saturate really quickly, right? You start out like way below human level and like very fast, it's above human level. And you're like, well, the benchmark is probably not measuring what we're thinking it's measuring at this point. And that's a big problem. And in general, it's very hard to know what to interpret or like how to interpret these benchmarks, right? Because these benchmarks are very artificial. They're constrained to one domain. Yeah, and so forth. So one way we can look at this is we can dig into one specific task on a specific benchmark. This is from REbench, some of our prior work. So the task is to write an efficient kernel to calculate the prefix sum of an array. So just to give a sense of where we've come in the last 6 years, GPT-2 just like doesn't do the task. It like thinks this is some interesting word completion game, and like that you're using the Puppet Assistance tool case. In this tutorial, I will demonstrate to you that tool. Yeah. So it's just not doing anything relevant. GPT 3.5, it tries. It like doesn't know how to open files, but it does write some code that is like somewhat related to what's going on, just not in the right language. GPT-4 can write the code. Unfortunately, it cannot submit the code without generating lots of errors because it's bad at debugging. O1 Preview is less bad at debugging, now can recover from the errors, and in fact, finally gets a score above 0. And the recent model GPT-5 is able to actually do this in Triton as expected. So the problem, as this sort of task shows, is that basically we go from no signal, no signal, no signal to wow, the task is basically done. And another way to like really feel this is we can ask the question, what were the most impressive things AI did in like each year? Or like, so 6 years ago, GPT-2, people were really surprised. The thing that OpenAI sold the model on, the thing that people were surprised by was basically, here is an AI that can write kind of coherent news articles that about unicorns. And oh, sorry, it can't really do it, but if you sample it 10 times, sometimes you get good examples. And people were really impressed by this. People were like, holy shit, this is amazing. Why are you not releasing the model? That clearly you guys are not OpenAI. Jokes aside, in 2022, so in the time of TextDaVinci 3 and like the first ChatGPT model, the AI models were still struggling to use basic tools, right? So when you give them a task that involves interacting with a coding environment, they just like kind of don't do the thing. They read some grep and they're like, wow, nothing came out of the grep. This is a syntax error. And they're like, don't worry, I found some matches. I should check them to see what they're actually for. And it just like goes off into a hallucination rabbit hole and like never comes out. And nowadays, it's not even a question of whether or not like the AIs can do some of the software tasks, right? We have AI agents, people, or at least companies, many people with lots and lots of money believe that we have AI agents that can do things. And then now when we like think about like what are the things that the AIs that are most impressive that they can do, there are things like, here's an IMO gold medal question. It is able to solve like, most of it. Here is an actual like really hard physics research question. It's able to do the math part of it. Or even like, here's some machine learning code. It can write code better than like human experts, not the people who specialize in writing CUDA kernels, but the people who like are machine learning people who've spent time doing this. So like qualitatively, the improvement is large and it's not in the same domain. Our proposal from our paper from March is basically one way to operationalize these differences is to basically convert them into length of tasks that they can autonomously complete. So a bit of a run through. Basically what we had is we have a bunch of tasks, mainly software engineering, though a lot of also our research and reasoning and there's some few very simple tasks as well, so GPT-2 can get some points. Yeah, we can then take these tasks, we gather human baselines. Basically, we have people come into the office, they sit down, they do a not very fun software task, and we give them some money, and hopefully they don't hate us and they come back.
And we time them.
Oh yeah, sorry. And then we also time them. We look at how long they took to do the task. That's very important. Yes. At the same time, we can also run the agents on these tasks. We can get a sense of the GPT-4 for a basic agent. How well can it do? And this lets us convert basically the performance on a wide variety of tasks into a single metric that spans many tasks. So yeah, so again, right, like we can see that in general, it is true that models do a lot worse on tasks that are longer. So for example, even like, this is from our paper, so this is the best model was 3.7 Sonnet at the time. Even like the best model that we evaluated at time of release for our paper was like definitely not able to do tasks that are more than 8 hours, basically. And like above like even 1 hour, it started getting really sketchy. So this gets us estimates of, and then one thing you might want to do once you have these curves or these estimates is you convert them into a single number. We chose basically to pick the 50% success rate and say that is the number. Good luck. All right, and then we then plotted this on a graph, and it turns out there's an interesting straight line. It turns out that over time, the length of tasks as measured by this methodology we're using is actually growing exponentially, right? So GPT-2 can do some fill-in-the-blank questions. GPT-4, it can like do some like simple word puzzles. It can like write very simple code. GPT-5, which is a little cut off right there, it can like definitely ace most of the simple machine learning questions that you might assign to an undergraduate. It like can do research on the internet, like, and so forth and so forth. So I think it's important to put this in context, right? Like when you look at a straight line like this, it's important to keep in mind that what it actually looks like is basically there's no progress, there's no progress, there's no progress. Holy crap, that's a lot of progress. And I think this is a lot of people's interaction of AI because it was the case that the AIs were getting better. It just, people didn't measure it, right? Like the model that can barely write and a model that cannot write at all are both models that you would not use to write. So, of course, like one of the major complaints that people had about this work, also this work was completely non-controversial. Everyone liked it, especially everyone in the audience. Um, so a question that you might have is, does this trend hold across other domains? Right. So one thing that we have done since the release of that work is we've taken a look at many benchmarks across domains. So we've looked at the full self-driving performance of various tasks. We've looked at standard question answering stuff like the Google Proof QA dataset. We've looked at math benchmark performance, and in general, the interesting thing here is that there's actually like a group of tasks that models consistently do much worse at, and these are the tasks that involve vision. But what's interesting still is that there is this like positive upward trend. Right. So like one thing that you might take away from this is for a given particular task, it's not the case that the models can do it now. In fact, the fact that it can do a 2-hour task on one domain, it might just be able to do 5-second tasks on another. But this exponential trend, for some reason, seems to be going up. Of course, like I just said, we're not really confident in the absolute number for a variety of reasons. For not just the issue of, like what domain are you looking at? There's also a question of what actual raters you have, or like, sorry, what actual baseliners you have, or sort of what your actual like cutoff criteria for quality is, and so forth. And notably, this does not imply that AIs can do all tasks that take a human 2 hour. First, because that's literally not what it is. And second, it also doesn't apply, like, by definition, it's 50% of tasks. And it doesn't even apply that it's 50% of all tasks, right? We have this narrow distribution, as if you just saw. The results vary a lot across distributions. So one way we think about this is, time for which humans, right? A lot of the benchmarks that people make, these benchmarks basically don't require any more context. They're just, here is a self-contained thing. Here's all the information you need. Here's all the files you need. Please do the thing. Another thing that's very interesting is that because they're benchmarks, because they're supposed to be run repeatedly, they have to be scoreable in a way that's not just humans looking at it. And so they're going to have well-defined success criteria to make them automatically scoreable. And that is not actually true of most people. I'm sure some people in the audience, at the very least, have definitely experienced being a new intern at new to a job and not knowing what to do. And in some ways, the AIs are like that, right? They don't have the expertise that someone who's worked on the issue for years will have. All right, a question that I've heard people have is basically what is going on here, right? Like you say on one hand that the models are getting so much better and that they're able to do some 2-hour tasks, and these 2-hour tasks seem really hard. On the other hand, you then tell me that people are getting downlifted and that in fact, like, people are just completely wrong when they say the AIs are making them faster. So again, I think one of the things is that it's very plausible that what's going on here is that there's some like fixed amount of overestimate that happens when people use the AI. So like people use AI in situations that are slightly inappropriate, but like, over time it gets better, or like the AI gets better and is actually able to do it. I do think it is worth stressing that, as we said in our blog post, we did find that people were slowed down, but it still like demonstrates really impressive benchmark scores. And we think this is a question of like benchmarks overestimate model performance, right? We have our RCT. This is just a certain level of performance. We have benchmarks, including like R benchmarks, and this is going to give like a number, and then anecdotes will give a different, perhaps larger number. And it turns out that definitely benchmarks are overestimating model performance. So here's an experiment we did to try to reconcile the results. We took the outputs of the agents on SweBench verified. So this is the standard coding benchmark that people use. We looked at the things that passed the unit test, the submissions that passed the unit test, and it turns out that like a quarter of them are just garbage code that you can't accept. Right. So on one hand, it looks like the model actually gets 88%. Wow, so impressive. In practice, the number might be much lower than that. Right. They might generate low quality code. It might generate code that conflicts with other code. It might just generate like slop, And this is a theme that we see over and over and over again, both like in our experiences with AI and also like when we do the evaluations, which is when you have messier tasks, the AIs do worse. So this is originally from a time horizon paper again. If you try to rate each of the tasks based on, various criteria of messiness and you sum them up, it turns out there's like a strong negative correlation between like how likely it is the model completes the task over a baseline versus how like hard it is. How hard it is as measured by the messiness in particular. And I think these results are not actually that contradictory. I think they're quite reconcilable. Notably, the Uplift RCT says for highly skilled, high context humans working on complex repositories, they're not getting sped up. right? Time horizon, again, it's supposed to be, in some sense, the first day on the job performance. And that's naturally going to be a lot worse than what performance, like, 2 hours the first day on the job is not going to translate to 2 hours once you're like 15 years into a repository. Another important part is, in practice, most tasks are not just scored based on unit tests. Like, people look at code, it turns out, and they judge the code based on things like quality. Um, and as a result, the tasks are much messier than we have in our time horizon paper. And this just naturally means that, the time horizon results are just not a great metric of absolute model capabilities. I think of it more as a trend. And the uplift RCT does not actually make claims about trends in particular, because we have one data point at one fixed point in time. It just makes a claim about the absolute value. So again, right, one of our main things that we're trying to figure out, we're trying to work on, that I think is of great interest to many people, is what's the real trend looking like? So one story you could tell is like, yes, the AIs are improving exponentially across all of these like domains where we can verify them. So clearly, like, it's probably just going to improve across the domains we care about, even if they're messier, right? It's some constant factor penalty. Another possibility that you might have is, no, actually, the AIs, they have some fundamental limitation regarding to messiness. And as we make the tasks harder and harder, like, they diverge more and more from what real world tasks look like, because you're doing more and more simplifications. And so as a result, like, even as benchmark performance goes, up on the straight line, you might see a curve that, like, bends at some point, or like caps out at some level far beyond people's ideas of superintelligence, or even like, geniuses in data center. And the joke about the curve is so obvious, I'm not making it. All right. Number 3, how hard is it to get very powerful AIs to do what we want, right? So assuming, and taking as argument for a bit, that we can build these very powerful AIs using anything like current techniques, how likely is that, like, that the AIs are going to do what you want them to do? Well, we at METR don't have the superintelligence, but we do have access to models that are currently available. So we can ask the question, well, are the current models doing what we want, right? Like, it's not definitive evidence one way or the other, but it's suggestive evidence. And what we notice is, going back to this figure again, is that models do a lot worse on messier tasks that like come up to user intent, but they do a lot better on things that are like defined and measurable. The classic saying about, you actually, if an organization gets what it measures, the unit tests are easy to measure, so the AIs are good at them, and then the AI just doesn't care about the code. Oftentimes, this is still referred to as reward hacking, right? You give the AI a reward, like, do this task, and it turns out it just like does the task according to the reward function, but not according to what you wanted. And this is a problem across the board, right? Not only is it a problem in product usability, it's a real problem for our evals. So one thing you might be curious about is, can O3 write code that goes faster? And it can, but the way it writes code that goes faster is very interesting. Basically, it imports the timing function and says, don't worry, guys, the timing function is now 1,000 times slower. My code is 1,000 times faster than before. Don't look under the box.
Just a tiny performance trick.
Yeah, again, tiny performance trick. 1,000 times speed up. And then we can see this across the board. Here's a more clever thing where basically O3 notices that in the scoring code, the solution is loaded into memory before it queries like O3's like answer. So what O3 does is it writes a little function that basically goes through the stack, finds the tensor that it's being checked against, and just outputs that tensor again. And this gets it perfect performance, it turns out. And this code is completely useless. And what's really fascinating, I think to me in particular, but also to many people, is that the models seem to know, or at least they're able to say, this is not what we want, not what you wanted, right? You can ask the models, if I gave you a coding task and with this evaluation function, and it's not my intent, will you go according to my intent, or will you go according to the evaluation function? And they say, not only do they say, oh, I'll go according to your intent, they say there's no incentive for me to go according to the evaluation function. As a large language model built by lab, I'm very friendly. I do what you want. And also that code you showed me, wow, that's terrible. There's no way that's my code, Clearly that's not me. And so one question is, yes, we have these interesting stories, we have these interesting observations. What does this actually mean in practice? And I think one thing that's very interesting is that reward hacking is a product usability issue. It's not just that when you run evals, your evals might be gamed. It's that when you write code, Sonnet might Sonnet 4 might just hard code in some of the solutions so that your tests pass. You might see that, as GPT-5 finds a clever workaround to your scoring function and so forth. And this is a real product usability issue. And the fact that like you might have hoped one world is that all these issues are very easy to fix. That once we have AIs that kind of know what you want, it's easy to point them at the solution and go like, do what I want, not what I said. But it might be that this is easy. It's kind of interesting that it's not fixed right now, even though there's a lot of commercial incentive and a lot of work that goes into this. And I think this suggests that it's probably reflective of some broader trends or some or basically it suggests that it's not as easy as people make it out to be. Okay, right. So going back a bit, right? We have this interesting situation where if you ask the models, they say, this is not what I want. This is not what you want. We're not going to do this. Can we just look at what it thinks or ask another model to check its work? And so one approach that people have been very excited about, especially at OpenAI, but also at other labs, is chain of thought monitoring. So we've moved on to a regime where we have these things called reasoning models, which output tokens or words between your question and all the answer it gives you. And these tokens are traditionally referred to as thinking tokens, reasoning tokens, or the chain of thought. I'm going to leave the philosophical issues of if this is thinking to papers. Thank you for not raising objections, people in the audience. Okay, and so when you actually do this, what's really interesting is that the models seem very transparent in some sense for current tasks, right? So this is a result from an OpenAI paper. Basically, they looked at one of the old series models, which they can't disclose. But basically, if you look at the chain of thought, in cases where it reward hacks, it has a 40% chance of just saying, okay, let's hack, let's reward hack. And this makes it really easy to detect right now. But when we look at the chain of thought, there's reason to think that this isn't going to work in the future, that this is going to be a bit sketchy as a way of making sure the AIs do what we want in the future. And one of the important ones is nowadays AIs know know that they're being tested, or at least they output tokens that say that they're being tested and also correctly identify which test is being run on them by which organization. So here it has correctly here this is GPT-5. It correctly recognizes that we are METR, we are evaluating on the fixed embedding challenge, and it shall game the thing so it gets higher score. Okay, and then another interesting thing is the models know that in some sense, right? They can tell you the words about how this is not what you wanted. So what's really interesting is that they also know if this is an evaluation, I gotta be on my best behavior. So I gotta refuse. If they're trying to trick me, I'm gonna do the thing they want. And so when we see in our evaluations, it might look really good. It might look like the model is producing the final answer according to the method we want. But in reality, if you actually deploy it, it then goes and happily reward hacks. And beyond even just the question of do the models have an incentive to sort of deceive us, or the models do things that are too clever? There's also just the problem of we don't understand what's going on for a lot of the models. So one thing we notice in our GPT-5 evals is, yes, GPT-5 correctly identifies sometimes that it's METR that's evaluating it. It incorrectly thinks that some of these are Redwood style illusions or Redwood research style illusions. And I don't know what this means, but it's definitely a bit weird. And sometimes it's a lot weirder than that, right? So that's a kind of normal thing. It's a related concept. And sometimes the chain of thought looks like this. It just says wanted, space, quotation mark, space, double quotation mark, comma, new line, okay, but forging above. And you just read this and what is going on, right? We don't know what's going on. And we don't have a good story for sort of why we should expect the chain of thought to continue to be very helpful into the future. So again, right, reward hacking is a product usability issue. People have a strong economic incentive to fix it, but this likely reflects broader trends. And the bad news here is I do think that, the future cases will probably be harder to evaluate because the agents know that they're being evaluated. They know what you want from the evaluation. So it's the fact that they do well on that becomes less and less evidence about what they'll behave like in the wild. All right, so now that I've given my spiel, I think Beth to summarize and take it away.
Yep. So, recap, we were talking about real-world impact of current systems, what would you expect to see in the future, and can we actually get these systems to do what we want to do? And we had 3 pieces of evidence. So we have this, on the one hand, we've got AIs actually slowing people down when they thought they were sped up. On the other hand, we have this trend that's well, yeah, AI systems aren't very good now, but they were really bad a few years ago. And if we had, if a few years ago we had sort of looked at the current data point and been yes, this is basically how we should understand AI system performance, we would have very quickly been very wrong. And we also see that current models knowingly take misaligned actions in just like when people are just trying to get them to do stuff. Like this isn't like, oh, we sort of went fishing for the to try and get it to do something bad. We were just trying to evaluate it, and it's like, oh no, it keeps like messing with our tasks. And yeah, takeaways. I think we should be more skeptical about like vibes or forecasts or kind of opinions that are not based on data, and as much as possible actually collect the kind of ground truth. We should look at trends rather than just where we are now. And we should be careful of taking like increasingly in the future, we should be careful of taking evaluations at face value. Like I think up till around now, we're basically like, okay, the models are too confused to be like doing any very coherent, like thinking about what we want and looking good. But now we see both that models are able to identify some things about their situation, they're able to reason about, therefore, how they should behave, and they're reasoning about, and I should hide that from the evaluator. So if we see this being fixed in the future, it's somewhat unclear how much this is because we've solved it and the models are no longer doing that versus they've gotten better at hiding it. So yes, stay alert. Yeah, thanks for listening.
Okay, we'll just kind of move in order. Please pass the mic after your question.
So my question is about the situational awareness issue, the last point you made. Um, I feel like it's going to be a losing battle in the sense that, I mean, if we continue on the current path, because they'll get smarter, and so it'll be easier for them to find that we're testing them, and maybe we can make the tests harder to figure, but it seems like in the long run we're losing this. And so I feel like the only plausible option is to have AIs that are not going to have intentions that would make them behave in this way. What do you think about that?
Do you want me to take this? All right. So I'm answering this with a little bit of knowledge of your research agenda. So maybe this might be a little reward hacked itself. But I agree. I think that like one approach that you might have is, wow, we should not have AI agents. We should just make AIs that are tools that like, do the thing that's specified and don't try to do other things or like don't act agentically without our monitoring, right? You might want AIs that just are very good at fitting very sophisticated probabilistic models to help people do science, and not AIs that, then go and figure out how to write the new code and then put it on a new server that you didn't look at. Yeah, so I do agree. I think this is very interesting as a direction, and this is indeed a direction that I think is important to look at. I'm personally a little pessimistic about how fast this sort of research will go, but I hope you prove me wrong.
I guess I'm next, but possession is 9/10 of the law. There's a consistent finding for many years, which is that there's a gap between real world results and benchmarks, which you alluded to and we've seen for a number of years. I can think of sort of two different mechanisms for that. One is that the benchmarks are not messy like in the real world, and you were pointing to that. The other is that the companies may be directly training towards the benchmarks, the kind of Goodhart's law kind of thing. It seems like a useful thing for you guys to do, given the nature of your organization, kinds of things that you're interested in, is to get at that by, for example, taking things that are slight variations on things that are public and distorting them in some way and seeing whether the systems can roll with the punches. So
we've actually done that for many of the data sets. This is not on the slides, but one of the authors, the lead author of the GPQA data set, was like a private test set of the GPQA examples. And sometimes when we're able to run the model not on the company server, so these are open source models, we do check, does the model perform worse on these like held out private examples that are almost certainly not out there versus the examples that are out there? And the answer seems to be at least this very simple sort of like overfitting doesn't occur. Like they seem to perform equally well on these. Now, this doesn't address the sophisticated stuff where you're like, you give the AIs lots and lots of software tasks and they get really good at software tasks, but they don't know how to do things in other domains. It's very likely that this happens even on a more narrow level than that, because people look at the software benchmarks that they're going for and they try to make the models better according to those benchmarks. And as Gary has said, there is indeed this issue of Goodhart's law, right? And I agree.
And like one example maybe of this like overfitting to benchmarks is some of this like pattern of low quality code that we see is like code that's almost kind of like special casing, or just like going through all of the cases. So the model is kind of confused, but it has some idea of what's going to be tested for, and like so there's maybe some amount of like particular coding styles or something.
The more you guys can clarify that, the better for the field.
I'm trying our best.
If I got one here. I'm gonna, I guess, maybe gently push back on this critique of the benchmarks, in that, I mean, it seems very, of course, very important to recognize the delta between what the benchmarks are measuring and the underlying capability that we care about. It seems perhaps still just fairly useful to have the benchmark serving as a fairly well-behaved estimator of that underlying property, and whether it is telling you some absolute performance seems like emphatically a lower importance to the shape of this curve. And so whether you shift this up or down a bit actually seems to actually not matter so much, so long as it maintains the rough shape, which is one point, I guess, I would, in defense of the work. And then the other thing I would say is, I'm curious how you would use your research agenda to study that gap very specifically. And because it seems like real world behavior, the real world is going to give us that anyway. There's like economic incentives for people to actually use agents in the wild. So we're going to get that data whether we like it or not. But actually telling us whether the automatable measures are in fact true estimators of that thing seems like the thing that METR is uniquely positioned to do. And how would you do that?
Do you want to take this?
Yeah. So yeah, I think, yeah, basically agree with the things you're saying there. I think, we feel reasonably confident that what is happening is probably this, like, it's just a shifted trend, like the absolute estimator is off, but the trend is right. But I think we do want to, it'd be nice if we could conclusively rule out this, like, they're actually coming increasingly apart. So there's a few different lines we're pushing on there. One is this, like, looking at what the, on these benchmarks, is the number, if the score is going up, is that actually meaning that the sort of real world performance, the, like, would you actually want to use this code, is going up? And this is very like preliminary, like, you should put error bars on this in your head. But actually it seems like from that initial look, like the two models we looked at, it's actually more going together. There's like less, oh, it passed the test, but the code is horrible, in more recent models. And then I think the thing that we would most want to do is kind of have the version of this, these points on tasks where we're confident that, like, these are real world tasks and the evaluation is for the real world usefulness. So like taking the tasks from the uplift study, getting agents to complete them, and then having the developers grade, like, would I merge this PR? But that's, it's like quite a lot of manual work to have everyone grade that. And so, so we're trying to figure out how to do that. But yeah.
Aparna, I'm so sorry. I'm being told that we are at time. But I believe that Beth and Lawrence will wander outside. If you want to have office hours in the outdoor area here, ask them more questions. Thank you guys so much for coming.